Previously, we looked at key European events like the Scientific Revolution, eh, and particularly the thoughts, the philosophies of the thinkers of the Enlightenment period, whereby scholars utilize reason and logic in order to try to figure out not just the physical world, but then also the society around them. Okay? So what we're going to take a look at today is, on one hand, you can have all these philosophers, people like Locke and Montesquieu and Rousseau and others, and they go and they converse and they talk and they go to these coffee shops and they come together and say like, hey, aren't these ideas wonderful? Don't they challenge a society that doesn't make sense, that's based upon superstition or religion and so forth, and what it might actually take for mankind of all classes and all groups to become equal. They talk about it, have a good cup of coffee, but in the end, they walk out, and usually oftentimes it's a middle class lawyer speaking with someone like a lord or a noble, and they go out and their societies are completely different. The lord and noble have all these privileges, whereby the everyone else, the third estate and others, do not. So eventually, over time, these ideas aren't just simply going to be ideas in books or coffee shops or whatnot. They will become real. They will become revolutionary. And so we're going to take a look at a series of lectures, videos, and documents in what I call the Age of Revolutions, a number of political and social upheavals across the world, leading to dramatic changes in the classes, structure, and politics of not just Europe, but all the way across the globe. And so we're going to look at the first three parts today, how it's not just simply the Enlightenment that we're looking at in terms of major changes. It's happening worldwide as the world becomes smaller, as all of a sudden, for the first time, the world is interconnected together. But a number of revolutions, particularly starting in the Western world, in regards to the American Revolution and the French Revolution, and from there across the globe as well. Okay. So our first major case, and we'll look at the rest of this, Napoleon, the various nationalist revolutions and others, and we'll look at a later time. Okay. But like we mentioned before here, the new global society, it means that there are new people and new groups that are coming into play as well. Okay. For example, in India, which is now ever being slowly swallowed up by not the British government per se, but the British East India Company, as the British East India Company starts to conquered using mercenaries, using financial interactions, alliances, and others, they're going to start to influence the society in India as well. And so for a great example of this is this group known as the Zamindars, who are and were utilized by the Mughal Empire as a series of tax collectors, tax farmers actually. And when the British East India came in, they saw this group as a potential elite group, and so as a result of this, they made them a landed aristocracy. So they awarded them for their loyalty with land and property, gave them rights of continued taxation, but also land ownership as well. And this becomes an aristocracy that becomes not loyal to the Mughals, but instead to the British East India Company as well. Furthermore, other upheavals across the globe includes Europe itself here. As more and more resources are coming into the continent, there are now greater sense of urbanization, very similar to the Roman Empire of the past here. And with that, the third estate, the non-noble, the non-clergymen, will start to grow in size. This group is often known as the European middle class or just simply the European gentry as well. And they're going to make some decisions, particularly in terms of family and family building. They're not farmers where you need laborers and therefore you need children. Instead, they start to have smaller families, numbering in maybe 4 or 5 kids, maybe less, as time goes along. But there are major demographic changes in European cities like never before. Another key theme we looked at in the previous unit, not just simply globalization and European colonization across the globe, but the solidification of centralized empires. And a great example of this is the Tokugawa shogunate in Japan. The samurai, this warrior class that was necessary to unify the Tokugawa shogunate, all of a sudden found itself with nothing to do. So what do you do with this class of soldiers who now have no one to fight against, they in a lot of ways become the key bureaucrats. So in a lot of ways, they exchange their swords for now, not necessarily pens, but replacement in terms of paper and working for the government as key bureaucrats to solidify the Tokugawa state as well. And then finally, when we look at the Americas, you have a new growing elite class. So you would recall the various caste system that existed in Latin America, starting with the Peninsulares, those who were born in Europe, who oftentimes became the ruling class. But those who were raised and born in the Americas, the Creoles, will become the localized elite. Okay, so again, they didn't have all the privileges, but they are growing in wealth from the silver and plantation trade that's growing in Spanish America, and they will become the influential elite, at least the local elites in Latin America, especially when independence and the talk of independence starts to rise in the 18th and centuries. Okay. But the biggest change happens to be the American Revolution. Now, I did something very, very controversial here. Maybe you take a look at it. Yeah, it's the quotes, right? So, hey, I put this in quotes because when we look at the American Revolution, it is in a lot of ways a sign of things that of dramatic change, but a lot of it is actually change that has been going on in Great Britain for hundreds and hundreds of years, something that we briefly mentioned in a previous lecture before this. Now, why I call this a quote revolution is because in a lot of ways, the growth of free market capitalist ideas are starting to grow in not just Britain, but the Netherlands as well, and will find itself in the British American colonies. When we look at some of the early American colonies, groups that settled the Americas happen to be private ventures. So instead of like we see with the Spanish or Portuguese empires that have been heavily solidified by the Spanish and Portuguese crowns, instead, it's investors, people who say, hey, let's go on this adventure, let's make this investment, let's get a few hundred people, throw in some money, hire some mercenaries and others, and they are the ones to actually make that risk and venture into the Americas. So the settlement of Roanoke and Jamestown and other early colonies were created by these joint stock companies as such. And these companies will start to grow and merge itself with the British Parliament in a number of different ways, creating now a more and more, not fully, but more and more free market system as well. Furthermore, Britain has always had issues in regards to religion, but hey, we see dramatic changes in the 17th and 18th centuries as the Protestant Reformation now has really taken hold across Europe, and there are now dozens and dozens of different Christian groups that are now seeking freedom of religion, many of which are whom are finding it in Britain at certain times. Others will seek it in the British colonies in the Americas. Groups like the Puritans, in trying to create this theocratic religious society, will find themselves in Massachusetts. The Quakers, led by William Penn, will settle and find Pennsylvania. The Catholics will also find themselves in a new colony called Maryland as well. In other social realms, like say for example, the lowest class of all slaves, that institution will continue on in the American colonies, particularly in the South. The biggest change, however, is that the nobles, or very few nobles, will find interest in what's going on in the colonies. And you can't really blame them, right? It's the backwater of these European societies. You don't want to find yourself in these colonies. That's where nobody wants to end up if you're have some sort of class and some sort of title. You don't get any influence from it. And so as a result of this, there is no more nobility, or very few nobles will find themselves in America. And then lastly, with the successful American Revolution, what is revolutionary is the new political system that is created. And a lot of this has to do with this quote right here. Boston Tea Party and others. It wasn't really necessary about taxation. In fact, the American colonists themselves were probably the least taxed citizens of the British Empire. Instead, it was about that point in regards to representation. Okay? It's something that's been going on in the colonies, this notion of self-government that the British Crown had allowed the American colonists to have. And so when finally, after the British victory in the Seven Years' War and the acquisition of Canada as well, all of a sudden there's a lot more land that the British will now have to control. Okay? And not only that, defend as well. And so when they finally said, hey, you know what, we fought this enormous global colonial war for the sake of defending these colonies, why not have the colonies pay for the defense? And when they start to enact a number of taxes, whether it's on sugar, on molasses, eventually on stamps and tea, the American colonists were frustrated not only by the taxation, but particularly about the lack of representation, leading eventually to a declaration of independence, a long war of, really a long civil war that they end up winning against the British with dramatic help from the French. That's one thing to keep in mind as well. At the establishment for the first time of a country that is governed by a document, in a sense. Okay? The U.S. Constitution and the subsequent Bill of Rights, which will provide the support of liberties for Americans, all of a sudden now you have a country whereby it's not the rule of a king, okay? It's the law, okay, that is the most powerful institution in any state. And that's where it really comes into play. Okay? Not only that, but there's also the accident of having 13 different colonies becoming 13 different states. Okay? When that didn't function well and they created the Constitution, we had for the first time what we call a federal government, whereby, or the term federalism, whereby a power is not just divided between the central government and different localities, but they share different powers as well. Both are sovereign in one way or another. In other words, the federal government, the central government in the United States can only do so much. Much of it is reserved for the states or the various localized governments. And that itself distributes power such that it's not one king, it's not one government that's making decision, but multiple pieces and multiple parts operating in a check and balance system. Okay? And that's what truly is revolutionary about Americas. Slavery continues. There's freedom of religion, free trade like we see in Great Britain. But hey, the biggest change is the institution of the Constitution. We get to France, which is our key topic for today. So what we're going to take a look at is the following. Now, usually I'm going to have a video here. And because of the situation that we're in, I'm going to leave these videos as options for you. So I have two options for you. The first of which is I've got a link to the History Channel's French Revolution video. It is an hour and a half. It's long, but it's also entertaining, and it's usually one of those videos that students come back and say, hey, I remember that one. That one was really good. And it's worth the hour and a half to go through, particularly if you want to limit the amount of time you take a look at least get through the first half hour, the first hour or so, and I think you'll get the gist. But hey, watch all 90 minutes. It's really good. And then from there, there is a document that you've been assigned on the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Women. So if you are going to watch this full video, I would suggest you watch up to the 30-minute mark, okay, and then go ahead and do the document, right where they start to talk about the Declaration of the Rights of Man. So that's about 30 minutes in, do the document, and then watch the rest of the video. Okay. The other option is, if time's an issue for you, go ahead and go to the crash course number 29, 12-minute video, rapid pace, great coverage. It'll get through the entire piece here. If you choose to, because hey, you've got some time on your hands, watch both. Go to the History Channel at the 30-minute mark, do the document assignment, watch the rest of the video, and then kind of get the big picture perspective context from the crash course video that is also linked as well. But either way, we will continue this lecture another time. And so take a look at this document, and we will recap it at a certain point as well. All right, guys, thanks.